can stand me up at the gates of hell, but I won't back down. No,
Ah, yes, a little bit of the man himself, Mr. Tom Petty, to get us started for the second edition of the Ben Faulkner Show. That's right, I've already made one, and I'm attempting to make number two. We'll see how this goes. Today, I'd like to talk to you for a little bit about a couple of things. First of all, Senate Bill 510, which proposes an act called the Food Safety Modernization Act. Of course, that's an innocuous-sounding title. That's a trick the politicians seem to enjoy playing. Give something a title that sounds sweet and innocent, and how could anybody possibly be opposed to something like this with this title? And then they put a whole big steaming pile of bird crap in it, such as the Patriot Act. Well, if you oppose this, by implication, you must not be a patriot. Well, if you oppose the Food Safety Modernization Act, the implication is that you are either opposed to food safety and or the modernization thereof. The Food Safety Modernization Act, which I am ashamed to say, both of the senators from my state, Mr. Saxby Chambliss and Johnny Isakson, both co-sponsored, but I suppose that's a different story for a different time. I'll just leave it at this. I haven't had a whole lot of respect for either of those two gentlemen since their respective offices lied to me during the period of time surrounding the bailouts in October of 2008. I contacted their offices in opposition to the bailout, and I was told by both of them that it was not a bailout. Well, obviously it was, and ever since, frankly, I've been hoping that somebody would run and beat them in the Republican primary to just go ahead and send them packing, send them into retirement. In fact, I saw something interesting riding around Athens, Georgia the other day. I saw a car with a Gadsden flag sticker on it, you know, that glorious symbol of the American Revolution that's been adopted by many of the Tea Party. It's a yellow banner with a coiled rattlesnake underneath it. It says, "Don't tread on me." It's very, very revolutionary in nature. It's very succinct in what it says about the American character and American politics. We prefer to be left alone, yet incidentally, this person did not see the contradiction and the irony of placing this Gadsden flag next to a Johnny Isakson sticker. Like Johnny Isakson has anything to do with the principles of the American Revolution. But anyway, I'm digressing a little bit. Back to S510, the Food Safety Modernization Act. There's been some hype about it circulating the internet and talk radio lately about what this bill actually does and what it does not do. Some have seemed to have gotten the impression that it's going to make growing your own food illegal. That is, growing your own food for your own consumption. Well, that's not actually what it does. That's close, but no cigar, so to speak. What it does is, if you grow food and you give it away or you sell it, you are now considered a community-supported agricultural supplier. A community-supported agricultural supplier. It's a bit of a tongue twister. They abbreviate it CSA, which, for those of you familiar with the history of this state, that abbreviation has some other historical connotations, but that's neither here nor there. The point being, under S510, if it were passed into law, you, to participate in the mere act of growing food and selling it or giving it away, you would have to get a license, presumably a federal license. The bill itself is convoluted. I've scanned through the thing. I've read sections of it. In fact, I've read most of it at this point. You know, it's amazing how large these bills get. It's like they don't want anyone reading them, including the senators and the members of the House of Representatives themselves, but admittedly, they don't read much of what gets passed. Nonetheless, the whole thrust of this bill is the extension of federal regulatory power over small-time agriculture, over sustainable agriculture, over our ability to grow food and support ourselves. This is a direct action against food co-ops, groups of people who've banded together throughout the United States in different locations to grow their own food and to share their own food. There's also an attack here, pretty bold and pretty brazen, against the rights of the states. There's no power delegated to the federal government to regulate agriculture. It's not there. It doesn't exist. It never has existed, even though essentially ever since the administration of FDR, there's been pretty consistent, pretty ongoing federal regulation and interference in agriculture. And look at the type of absurdities that come from that. One need look no further than the foundational case relative to federal regulation of agriculture, Wickard v. Filburn. Go look it up. Go read it. See how absurd that was. And, of course, this is something that comes to us courtesy of the Interstate Commerce Clause, the current interpretation hailing from Wickard v. Filburn, the idea that the federal government can essentially regulate anything it takes the notion to, even if the activities occur entirely within the limits of one single state, and therefore just by sheer basic operational logic, could not be in interstate commerce. Nonetheless, that's what the courts have discovered. That's the interpretation that Congress is assuming, and that's what we're faced with. So we definitely need to oppose S510. We need to oppose its House equivalent, which is H.R. 2749. Haven't had a chance to look at that yet. I'm sure it's just as much an abomination as S510, but it's not going to stop you from growing your own corn in your own backyard, but it is going to make it difficult if you decide to, I don't know. My mother sometimes makes preserves off of her fig tree. She gives that away. Under this bill, that becomes a subject of federal regulation, and she would need a license for that, and if, God forbid, someone got ill from eating my mother's fig preserves, which hasn't happened yet, she could be held accountable for that. This bill essentially has very little to do with safety or modernization or protecting us from some type of biological attack against the food supply of the United States. It's about control. It's about controlling something very basic, our ability to feed ourselves, our ability to sustain ourselves, and it's about increasing the scope of the power of the federal government at the expense of the states and individual liberty. But let's look who benefits from this. Industrialized agriculture, the large farms, the large, well-connected, corporatized variety of agriculture, the whole get big or get out. These people are well-connected. They donate generously to political campaigns. They don't want the competition from the little guys. And this is a prime example of them being able to use their influence in Washington to be able to attempt to squash community agriculture, to squash the ability of private individuals to feed themselves without having to go to the supermarket and buy the products of big agri. Follow the money and you'll get your answer.
You're on the no-fly list.
We are having this baby on Friday. How do you expect to get home?
Hey, you want to ride with us?
Crisis averted, I'm driving. Say hi to her.
Do you have a hairdresser out west? I just got this killer perm and it needs some major upkeep.
So that's what I'm dealing with.
We're going to be traveling for a few days and it wouldn't hurt to get to know each other.
I despise who you are at a cellular level.
Okay, I've heard that before, and I'm trying to work on it.
Okay, you've just heard a few seconds from the trailer for the film Due Date, featuring Robert Downey Jr., Zach Galifianakis, and Jamie Foxx. It opened on November 5th. It's been released by Warner Brothers and Legendary Pictures. Now, I haven't gotten to see the film yet. I'm hoping to get to see it this weekend. It looks like it's going to be very, very hilarious. In fact, everything I've ever seen with Zach Galifianakis in it is just completely outrageous and side-splitting and ridiculous. But anyway, the whole premise behind the film being this. Robert Downey Jr.'s character is supposed to be trying to get home for the birth of his child. His wife's expecting. He needs to be there. He wants to be there. And he gets to the airport and he finds out that his name has been put on the no-fly list. That puts him in a terrible predicament. Is he going to be able to make it home? Is he going to be able to see the birth of his child? Is he going to be able to be there for his wife? He can either not make it or he can ride with Zach Galifianakis' character. This got me to thinking about the very nature of the no-fly list in and of itself. There's no due process involved in that. If you get put on it, you don't get something in the mail telling you that you're on the no-fly list. You don't find out till you make it to the airport. And I've had this happen to some friends of mine, people I know. They go to the airport and then all of a sudden they find out they're on it and they can't fly. Obviously, it's not just foreign terrorists or foreign nationals being put on this list. It's also Americans who, in many instances, bear no relation whatsoever to any sort of group or activity that could be considered even remotely political or extremist. There was a case I heard of, I believe it happened in Washington State, of a young boy about 7 years of age, his name being put on it. And his parents, of course, being unable to fly with him and just completely outraged by the fact that his name had been put on the list. And I've heard proposals, including those suggested by none other than Rahm Emanuel and a few others in Congress, that if you get your name put on this list, your right to own firearms ought to be restricted. Now, that's interesting. So there's no due process involved in being put on the no-fly list. There's no clear indication of where you should go to challenge your inclusion on the no-fly list. There's no way, apparently, of getting yourself off the no-fly list, and all of a sudden, we're going to peg Second Amendment rights, or rather, ignore Second Amendment rights by saying if we even we've arbitrarily put you on this list saying that you can't fly. We're not going to allow you to buy a firearm. We're not going to allow you to own a firearm. That strikes me as simply a backdoor way of subverting our rights to keep and bear arms. Now, freedom of travel, that goes back to Magna Carta, just like due process. That's being tampered with by the nature of this no-fly list. You know, there's so much nationalism, mythological nationalism, surrounding the way the American founding is presented so often in the public school system and just in American political and popular culture in general, to where we kind of lose sight of the fact that the founding generation, their chief concern, what motivated them initially to separate from the king's government, was the fact that they felt like that was the best way, the best avenue they had available to preserve their traditional rights and liberties under English law. Their ancient English liberties going back to Magna Carta. What we see here is the negation of that, the slow, piecemeal negation of those ancient traditional rights that as Americans we inherited from England. So the no-fly list equals no due process. Go read the Fifth Amendment, go read the 14th Amendment. I'm going to leave you with an excerpt from yesterday's interview conducted by Alex Jones with Ron Paul and his take on the TSA.
You have a better chance, doctor, as you know, of dying from a bee sting than being killed by terrorists. Moving to the next subject, this radio show a month ago launched the exposure of the TSA with the new enhanced pat-down, kind of like enhanced interrogation, is torture. This is molestation. Now they admit they're sticking their hands in people's pants. Pistol tried to deny it yesterday when he was on ABC, but they reported that ABC reporters are having them stick their hands down their pants. I have witnessed men touching babies' crotches, so this is now confirmed, and I believe this is a catalyst for the eruption of the anger that the American people already have. Doesn't this violate the 10th Amendment? What are minimum wage federal employees doing, groping everybody? I mean, how did we go this far?
It's hard to figure out. Who would have ever believed this? And the other day when I introduced my legislation to deal with this, I said, you know, I worry about the foreign policy, the spending, the Federal Reserve, our debt, and the whole mess, which are huge. Yeah, this one addresses something else. This one is just such an affront, so much out in the open, in government being so bold as to maul us in public and say they're doing it for our interest. If we tolerate this, there's something wrong with us. I mean, something wrong with it. It's almost like it's probably not fair to say this because so many people don't deserve it. We deserve, you know, some of this stuff if we don't do something about it, and hopefully the American people will do something. They'll eventually have to boycott the airlines or whatever, or throw more of the bums out. Maybe the Congress will get off their duff and do something in January and insist that we rein in the TSA.
All right, that's going to do it for the second episode of The Ben Faulkner Show. Thanks for listening. Sing it, Johnny.
It was the time of the preacher when the story began of the choice of a lady and the love of a man. How he loved her so dearly, he went out of his mind when she left him for someone that she left behind. And he cried like a baby, he screamed like a panther in the middle of the night. And he saddled his pony and went for a ride. It was the time of the preacher in the year of 01. Now the preaching is over and the lesson's begun.